Good morning, dear fellow teachers and faculty members and students. This morning, my message will be about the World Distance Learning Day. Distance learning has taken various forms since it started in certain schools, or rather colleges and universities of the United States and Britain in the second half of the 19th century. Just like so many other forms of learning, or rather so many other uh, types of interaction between human beings that we have currently on the basis of the digital devices, the computers of various kinds, cell phones, smartphones, and the television. It did not start overnight, and it certainly has not ended. So its development continues. So most of the early practitioners of distance learning were indeed colleges and universities in the United States and Britain. At first, the early forms of distance learning involved the exchange of letters between the teachers and the students who could not attend their lessons, for example, because they were sick, or their family members were sick, because they had to work in order to make ends meet, or because they simply were too poor. Towards the end of the 19th century, some teachers realized that the phonograph, which was then a rather new digital device, it was in fact the tape recorder's most primitive form and had been invented in the 1870s, could be used also to record their lessons. Therefore, they began to send those recorded lessons to those of their students who could not be physically present during their lessons. So what happened in the 20th century? Distance learning grew exponentially. In the first half of the 20th century, these early forms of distance learning, the exchange of letters and phonograph discs or recordings, spread through North America, meaning Canada and the United States, most of Europe, and several Latin American, African, Asian, and Oceanian countries. Occasionally, the news films were also used as educational materials. However, usually they were viewed in the movie theaters, not in the schools. Then, in the second half of the 20th century, distance learning became more varied, more digitalized, and more widespread. Because in the 1950s and the 1960s, the television, which by the way had been invented already in the 1920s in its most primitive form, became a common household appliance in North America, most of Europe, and several Latin American, African, Asian, and Oceanian countries. As a result, a growing number of teachers and other educators started to prepare televised lessons, which were broadcast usually after they had been recorded, because live broadcasting in the 1950s and 1960s was not very common except for the news broadcasts. For the students who could view the television programs either at their homes or at their friends' homes. In addition, many schools around the world built or arranged special rooms, lecture theaters, or basements, for example, where these educational TV programs or videos could be viewed. Moreover, many educational cassettes were recorded and produced, especially in North America, Western Europe, Australia, and New Zealand between the 1960s and the 1980s. So simultaneously, gradually in the 1970s and 1980s, more schools started to purchase television sets for the viewing of educational videos, TV programs, and movies. So in North America and the richest European and certain other countries, this process had already probably begun in the 1950s and 1960s. But then, of course, the television sets were virtually all those old-fashioned sets that were black and white ones. But in the 1970s and 1980s, tens of countries in the world adopted the color television sets and the color television programs, which of course made the educational videos, broadcasts, programs, and movies a lot more lively than the old um, black and white um, movies, TV programs, and videos. And because I am much too old to be a millennial, I was born already in 1972, I can still remember how in the 1980s and the start of the 1990s, first in Finland and then in Canada, I watched quite many of these programs and movies, first in elementary school and then in high school. In the 1980s, many schools throughout the world bought and installed computers as modern alternatives to the traditional paper and pencil or pen exercises and assignments. And data processing or information technology began to be taught at many schools, especially high schools, colleges, and universities around the world. And then, of course, the computers were also alternatives to the traditional typewriters for the drafting, revising, and polishing of the students' essays. And then at the college, seminary, and university level, undergraduate theses, master's theses, and eventually the doctoral or PhD dissertations. Between 1989 and 1991, a British computer scientist, Sir Timothy Berners-Lee, developed the World Wide Web, or the Internet as we now know it, which spread to tens of countries during the 1990s. And gradually in the 1990s, more schools started to use the Internet as an educational tool to search for, compare, analyze, and share information, and increasingly to ease and quicken the communication between the teachers and the students. How? Via the email messages. In addition, in the 1990s, more schools began to use CDs or compact discs instead of the traditional cassettes as tools of teaching and learning to record normal speech and then, of course, plays, simulated exercises, and music of various kinds. The production of educational CDs began in North America, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and several rich Latin American, African, and Asian countries. From those countries, the educational CDs spread to most other countries during the next 2 decades, the 2000s and the 2010s. Simultaneously, in the 2000s and the 2010s, the internet spread to almost all countries of the world, and most of those countries also adopted the online learning materials in their curriculums or teaching plans as tools of teaching and learning. As a result, many schools developed their websites, established their school email systems, began to upload and download learning and teaching materials from the internet, and to organize digital seminars or webinars, conferences, tutorials, and even lessons. While many educational CDs were still produced, they were increasingly replaced by educational online videos, documentaries, and movies. Therefore, most countries of the world should, at least in principle, have been technologically capable of transferring their schools online starting in or around March 2020, shortly after or around the time when this still unfortunately ongoing COVID-19 pandemic was declared by the World Health Organization as a worldwide pandemic, especially in the cities. However, wide regional differences existed and still exist, particularly in Africa, but also, sadly, in many Asian and Latin American countries, and in some Oceanian countries, the rural internet connections are slow and scattered compared to the urban internet connections. As a result, most of the students who have been unable to study regularly online live in the rural towns. To the extent that digital learning is available for many students of those countries and continents, especially in Africa, but not exclusively there, it takes place in the form of educational TV programs. Indeed, according to a recently published United Nations report, about 140 million new students are still waiting for the start of their school year. Logically, many teachers, other educators, students, parents, and guardians wonder how the many academically lost days can be compensated for. Another concern is how to find ways to help the academically challenged children and teenagers. Fortunately, many private educational activists, including many who are connected to NGOs or non governmental organizations, have given informal lessons and learning materials to the students who have been deprived of regular education during the pandemic. Many teachers, students, parents, and guardians are also devising clever, innovative, and creative online plans to help those students. In addition, many online experts are constantly developing new teaching and learning applications and improving the old ones. Again, it has been shown that we humans can adapt reasonably well to crises and we can overcome them together. Next, I would like to briefly summarize the do's and the don'ts of online learning. I've narrowed them down to 5 points. The do's. 1. Be punctual in logging into the online lessons on time. If you are late, please apologize to the teacher and try to focus on the lesson as quickly as you can. 2. Try to be punctual in submitting your seat work and homework answers and your course projects on time. 3. Communicate with your teachers regularly, especially if you need help in understanding their lessons and or in completing the seat work exercises, homework assignments, and course projects which they have assigned to you. 4. Participate regularly in the digital lessons classroom discussions in order to show that you are interested in learning and that you are thankful to your teachers for the time and effort which they have invested in preparing their online lessons. 5. On the other hand, give also your classmates, if you have any, enough opportunities to contribute to the classroom discussions. In other words, if a classmate is speaking, please listen respectfully and wait for your turn to speak. You can, of course, also use the chat box function of Google Meet. Then the 5 don'ts in this brief morning message. 1. Avoid frequent lateness and absences, especially the ones which you do not explain the reasons for either to your subject teachers or to your class advisors. 2. You should not be passive or uncommunicative when your teachers either ask you questions or greet you at the start of the online lessons. 3. Avoid submitting blank files as classwork because obviously you will have to resubmit such classwork in order to be graded on it. 4. Do not willfully ignore or break the teacher's instructions for the completion and the submission of classwork. Of course, if you have sincere and constructive disagreements with the teachers on the contents of classwork, negotiate with them respectfully and patiently. So that your primary goal, of course, has to be, or the primary goals must be, to help the teachers teach you even better and then to improve your and your classmates' study performance. And 5, do not deprive your classmates of the chance to answer questions, but rather wait patiently for your turn to answer. Finally, I'm going to outline a call to action for all of us as an international school community. We should try to improve our performance as online teachers and learners and try to keep trying our best until the end of all online courses. Obviously, I have been teaching and studying long enough to humbly admit the fact that these principles are at times difficult to follow, but they are still worthy goals to strive for. Secondly, if you notice some worthy websites, articles, blog posts, video links, online TV or radio programs, podcasts, documentaries, or movies, please share them with your teachers and your classmates. We can all benefit from such contributions to our online courses. Thirdly, from time to time, you can share the types of methods or techniques which have helped you as online learners or as online teachers with the goal of encouraging, helping, and inspiring your fellow students or fellow teachers to try their best. Fourthly, give encouraging feedback regularly when you perceive that your classmates and or teachers are really trying to advance in online learning and or teaching. Fifthly, keep your eyes and ears open and share from time to time interesting, thought-provoking, and even fascinating news items from other schools, countries, and continents with the goal of making online learning and teaching even more inspiring. Sixthly, and finally, please follow the international news regularly and, if possible, in multiple languages to improve your linguistic skills and to widen your worldview. Thank you so much, dear fellow teachers, faculty members, and students, for your attention to this morning message, and have a wonderful, blessed, and inspiring new school week and September ahead.